Some people read the verse and believe that there is a contradiction. The Lord said to him, "Who gave man a mouth? Who made you deaf or dumb? Who gives you sight or blinds you? Isn't it me, the Lord?" Suppose a person abuses sugar and food and gets diabetes. And in a crisis, sugar burns the retina and the person goes blind. Was blindness God the one who did it, or the abuse of food it generated? Many people want to look for contradictions in the Bible without even thinking. This verse came about because Moses said this. But Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been able to speak, neither in the past nor now that you have spoken to your servant. I can't speak well." Moses did not wish to speak to the people, and said that he could not speak well. Then God said, "Who gave man mouth?" To give does not refer to an object, but to build man with a mouth. The same thing happens to the deaf or dumb. But note, each one's mouth is described in the genetic code. Thus one who has developed the genetic code knows of the possibilities of a person to be mute or deaf, or even to become blind. The explanation was God's ability to do what he wants. Note that in the translation we have "who concedes sight or makes him blind." Notice the term "grant." The term "grant" comes from a Hebrew word that can also define determine. This word appears 580 times in the Bible, and defines not only determining, but several other points in which one defines something to be so. The question of the verse shows Moses that everything that happens God knows, and if it does, God knows everything because it has been determined. This was clear to Moses, for there were several wars at the time, and many were blinded in battle. Why, those who blinded each other were the warriors, but all of the wars that exist God knows when and how they arise. In fact, man had not eaten from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and no person would be blinded. So we know that Moses understood what God had said. Only those who seek a contradiction there, who force not to understand. In the end God tells Moses, "Now therefore go, I will be with you, teaching you what to say." Note that the verse in 11 defines determine, and the 12 says that God will teach what he would say. And that is the clearest fact of the text. If man had obeyed God, he would not have eaten the fruit and there would be no misfortune. If man loved his neighbor there would be no wars, and many would not die or be blinded. But by deciding man the wrong way, several consequences occur. For example, the law of gravity exists. The one who made the law of gravity knows that if someone jumps too high he will die. If the law of gravity were different, man could fly. So who defines the laws defines the rules. These rules define how a person speaks or how a person stops speaking. In fact, the set of verses only determines that God has the ability to do what he has defined. It is impossible for a person with a grounding in interpretation of text to find that there is contradiction in these verses, as they culminate in verse 12 with the term teaching. Now God speaks to Moses in the concept that Moses agrees to do what God asks. Even so, Moses says, "But Moses answered him, Ah, Lord, I ask you to send someone else." Note that while demonstrating God's ability, Moses resists not doing the work. We can also see it in the book of Lamentations. Offer the face to the one who wants to hurt you, and swallow the dishonor. For the Lord will not despise him forever. Though he will bring sorrow, he will show compassion, so great is his unfailing love. For it is not his pleasure to bring affliction and sorrow to the children of men. To crush all the prisoners of the earth with their feet, to deny anyone their rights against the Most High, to prevent anyone from gaining access to justice. Would not the Lord see such things? Who can speak and make it happen if the Lord has not decreed it? In this verse we can observe an interesting thing. What does it say? Because it is not your pleasure to bring affliction and sorrow to the children of men. If you recall, I quoted the law of gravity. A person who jumps off a building and dies falling is not something we wish for, but facts have occurred that such a person came to fall. Be it your will or someone else's, or a carelessness, or decision not to take proper safeguards. Thus a man may be blinded in war, but we see that even if such things occur, the verse says, "Who can speak and make it happen if the Lord has not decreed it?" Thus the term decree contained in verse is the same as defining existence for something. Like the law of gravity, that if a person jumps too high, he dies. Had I not enacted such a law, the jumping person would not die. But rules are set, and so every man must decide. Now Moses decided not to speak, and so it was. But didn't God know? Let's look at the verse. Then the Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He answered, "I don't know. Am I responsible for my brother?" Look at the verse. God asks where Cain's brother is. Why didn't God know where he was? In the next verse he says, "The Lord said, What have you done? Listen. From the earth your brother's blood is crying out." Not only did God know where Abel was, he knew that Cain had killed. See that Cain said he didn't know. A person with a minimum of text interpretation can clearly understand that God does this for each one to determine their choices. This is standard. For example, we can see on the back. He said to her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she answered. Jesus said to her, "You have spoken correctly, saying that you have no husband." According to the text, we would imagine that Jesus did not know that the wife had no husband, because he told her to call her husband. She said she had no, and Jesus said she was correct, showing that he knew she had no husband, and yet Jesus completed. The fact is, you already had 5, and the man she now lives with is not her husband. What you just said is true. As well as knowing that she had no husband, he knew how many men she had, and that the man with her is not married to her. Note that a person may try to look for contradictions, but it is merely a desire not to wish to understand the text. In fact, the term of determining that a person see or be blind involves the rules already laid down by God. Like health laws, physical laws, free will laws and others. There is no contradiction. There are people who try not to use logic to understand how the established rules work.
If you are looking for more content from different areas, visit the reformadorstad.com website. News and detailed content can be found. With system of research and organization of text and video.